Good afternoon. Today is Thursday, May 21, 2009. My name is Alejandra Mendoza, and I'm with James Reilly to have a conversation about treatment practices in photograph conservation. This interview is part of a series of interviews I'm conducting to photograph conservators as part of my project for the Advanced Residency program, in which I intend to describe and investigate the current state of treatment practices in our field. So I would like to follow a format for the interview, in which I will begin asking you questions about your experience and your opinion regarding conservation treatments and treatment approaches, followed by questions addressing specific treatment topics, to end up with some questions about training and the future challenges of the field in this subject.
Okay.
So I would like to begin asking you, could you please tell me your name, your job title, and affiliation?
My name is James Reilly. I'm director of the Image Permanence Institute at Rochester Institute of Technology.
And could you please describe your professional career to me?
Sure. I always was interested in photography, and even as a child had a darkroom that my father helped me create. And later on in life, in my early 20s, I became interested in the graphic arts, and I worked in the printing industry, and then was fortunate enough to get a job near the Eastman House at the Gleason Works, just directly behind the Eastman House, and I learned about the world of historical photographs, 19th century photographs, and somewhat later about the world of photograph preservation and conservation. So I started to experiment with 19th century techniques, made salt prints, made albumin prints, subsequently did a lot of research in the library and the archive at George Eastman House, and then I wrote a book called The Albumin and Salted Paper Book, which was a kind of historical investigation and how-to. And that book contained a lot of information about conservation and preservation, much of which was wrong because I didn't know much about it. And subsequently I started around 1978 here part-time at RIT, learning about what are the causes of deterioration in 19th century photographic materials. Started doing accelerated aging and learned more and more about those materials, and then gradually there was a full-time job here, and through grants worked here until the mid-'80s, and then the Image Permanence Institute was established, and we've continued for the last 25 years to do research on preservation of imagery and other kinds of recorded information. Mm-hmm. And for more than 10 years I've been co-director of the Advanced Residency program in photograph conservation, mm-hmm. along with Grant Romer. And I must say at the outset of this interview, it's a little bit asking me about treatment is, as they say, asking the blind man to do a painting, because I am not a treatment conservator. I didn't have that training, and I'm aware of this topic, which is why I may have some thoughts to share, but mm-hmm. It's not from direct experience.
Thank you, Jim. So to start talking about treatment now, I would like to begin asking you, how do you define treatment, or what do you consider treatment is?
I think anything that alters the physical nature of the object or its chemical nature could be considered a treatment. Perhaps it's easier to define that by like what it isn't. I don't think providing a new enclosure that isn't permanently attached, or simple mechanical stabilizing of a photograph, providing a new secondary support or something like that. Mm-hmm. That isn't treatment to me. Mm-hmm. Treatment are the things that normally come to mind. Things that alter the object physically or chemically. Flattening is a treatment. Cleaning, surface cleaning is a treatment. compensation for loss, and certainly anything that's chemically interventive that might actually cause a change in the image, or a change in the binder, or a change in the support.
Mm-hmm.
Things like intensification, or those are certainly treatments, or daguerreotype cleaning.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my definition of treatment's pretty straightforward.
And Jim, what do you think is the goal of the treatment, or in like a general sense, what would be the goal or the aim of conservation treatment?
Well, broadly speaking, it's to stabilize and repair harm that's been done, or prevent harm from happening. And there's a whole range of activities that are in that realm. And then there's, of course, the cosmetic improvement, the aesthetic improvement. It may not be threatening to a photograph that there's a part of the image missing,
Mm-hmm.
but it may be threatening to the aesthetic appreciation. And so, that's a broad realm. But those are the two key goals to, well, maybe you call them three. Address harm that has been done that threatens. There's a tear. It can no longer be safely handled, and therefore that repair is kind of heading off further potential damage, or just to stabilize and prevent something from happening in the future, to keep it away from some kind of harm. I guess really those are the same thing. And of course all the goals are cosmetic goals, which vary from place to place, person to person.
Thank you. And you've partially addressed, I think, with this answer, but I would like to ask you, in the observation of conservation treatment performed in the field throughout your career, what do you think are the factors that determine the need for treatment or for an intervention? Are there other factors that...
Well, there are so many millions of photographs, and there's a natural triage that goes on. Some photographs would never be considered for treatment because they simply they're not important enough to merit that kind of individual attention. I mean, that's one of the hallmarks of treatment, is that one has to engage with that object as an individual object, to look at it, to document it, to think about it, do something with it. And treatments can be very, very simple or very, very elaborate, but you do have to engage with that individual one.
Mm-hmm.
And that itself is something that sets the treatment issue apart from the great, great mass of photographs and collections. I mean, even in fine art collections, the overwhelming majority of objects will never be treated. They will be rehoused. They will be, cared for in many, many ways. They may be, lots of things can be done with them, but they won't be treated necessarily by my definition of treatment. So what are the criteria that would govern that? Well, for whatever reasons, it has to be important enough to claim that attention.
Mm-hmm.
If you only have 10 photographs, you can address them all individually. If you have 10 million, the chances become somewhat similar to winning the lottery, that a given object would be treated. And so it has to be important enough, and it has to be something, in my view, that photograph may have many needs, but it has to be something that the person who's contemplating doing the treatment knows how to do, is reasonably skilled at, experienced at, and so on. So when you say the criteria for treatment, I think I've already expressed it, like you alluded, that if it's threatening to the photograph, or if it's really compromising the aesthetic appreciation of the photograph, and if the photograph itself and the entire context of the photograph are such that it would justify that level of resources and attention.
Thank you, Jim. also you were talking about the engagement that a conservator needs to have with the photograph
as an individual,
as an
yes.
individual in order to treat it. So I would like to know if you think there is a methodology that a photograph conservator should follow, or what do you think are the steps involved in this process?
Well, certainly the fundamental methodology is very well known and clear in the profession, I think, as I have observed it.
Mm-hmm.
Following the code of ethics and the recommended approaches, one does an investigation and a documentation of condition, and one does a whether it's just for yourself as the conservator, or for a client, a private client, or for the institutional client, the curator, or whatever, you make a proposal, and you discuss with whoever you need to discuss with, the owner or the curator or whatever, what you propose to do, and then you do it, and then you document the outcome, and that's the difference between the professional conservator and someone else who might decide to treat photographs. The professional conservator is aware of those basic steps and basic approaches.
And do you think there's a method to evaluate the treatment results, or have you observed some?
Well, presumably one has an analysis and a plan. And the first level of evaluation would be the conservator themselves, he or she, saying, I wanted this to be flattened. Is it flat now or not? Mm-hmm. I wanted to compensate for this loss, which I thought was very distracting, or there's a big mark in it. I wanted to remove that mark, or a stain, or I had certain goals that I was going to address by techniques I used. Most of them are pretty straightforward. At the conclusion of treatment, when you write up a report, you can do a kind of very straightforward analysis. Did I achieve what I hoped to achieve? And I think every practicing conservator does some version of that.
Mm-hmm.
There may be other kinds of evaluation one could imagine. You could imagine an evaluation after some period of time, and that's almost never done. Or if it is, it's only in the context of, it's not flat anymore. It was flat 5 years ago. Why isn't it? Or, now I suddenly see that in painting, standing out much more, or the surface has changed, or something along those lines. It's so free-form. The needs of photographs are so diverse, mm-hmm. and the things that you can do are rather limited, ultimately, mm-hmm. That it's difficult, as I think you found when you began to think about the subject for yourself initially, that evaluation has to be as tailored to the object and tailored to the circumstances as the treatments themselves have to be tailored to the object and tailored to the circumstances. So evaluation's kind of tough, and particularly evaluation in the long term. Mm-hmm. And then, going back to the idea that there are treatments that have primarily aesthetic goals and primarily functional goals, let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. The functional goals are somewhat easier, I think, to evaluate, mm-hmm. and the aesthetic goals are more individualistic and more rooted in the context and in the personalities of the people. Even so, there's probably pretty broad agreement on some general ideas about aesthetic compensations and improvements. But I don't think you could get the board of plastic surgeons to agree on a set of evaluative criteria for how successful surgeries were. Mm-hmm. Some patients are going to feel your surgery was not successful, no matter how the outcome, and others are going to be happy. And it's hard to be objective about these kinds of aesthetic issues. I think the overwhelming, as we'll speak about that now, the overwhelming motivation for much of the treatment that actually gets done is aesthetic, I think. It's simply because it gets harder to choose stabilization treatments, and having done surveys, having read many surveys of collections, it's very clear that the number of items that could be recommended for stabilization treatment is generally huge. The resources far too few to accomplish that, and so they just tend to not be done just by the reality of things. Whereas when there is an exhibition, the motivation is there, the incentive is there, and often the funds are there to put the resources toward that. So you have to say in practice, the primary motivation for treatments in reality is, as much as we would like it to be functional, is probably aesthetic.
Thank you, Jim. I wanted to ask you, you said that the treatments that are done are few options. That you made a comment about
The conservator's toolbox. That's, while it may seem, if you're a conservator, that there's a tremendous amount to learn about that, and that one could never know enough, and that the toolbox seems to have many, many possibilities. Seen from another perspective, a perspective probably what conservators would consider naive, but what can you do about some of the biggest problems that we face? My photograph is faded. Can you help me? No. If it's faded a little bit, then maybe we can help you with the compensating for that. But if it's just faded a lot, and there's the fundamental chemical changes that occur in photographs very often are not addressable by treatment. You can't undo successfully the oxidation and migration of silver. You can't undo successfully the fading of chromogenic dyes. And even for some physical or mechanical problems, there are limits to how much stain removal can be done. There are limits to how the surfaces of photographs can be reconstructed and made whole when they're just totally disrupted. And it's one of the things that the naive observer of conservation, you can see this sometimes when conservators give talks, and they talk about a treatment that they worked on, and there's somebody who isn't close to conservation. When you get to the part of the presentation where the final before and after are shown, sometimes you see in these people like, hey, is that all you were able to do? I mean, I can still see where that tear was, and I can still see it was yellow, and I still see that it's faded, and yeah, it looks a little better now, but and so there are real limits, I think. That's what I mean by there are some, I think, stark limitations on what can be accomplished in treatment. On the other hand, there are great things that can be accomplished, and it isn't easy. I didn't mean to say that there's just a few techniques to learn and then you're done. But what I meant is, in this sense, there are some fundamental limitations.
Thank you. My next question is about degree of treatment or extent of treatment. And conservators we commonly use the terms like minor, moderate, major to describe intervention. So I would like to know your opinion about these terms. What do you think they mean, or do you think they work? I don't know. Do you think the conservation can be defined into these terms? Major, minor?
Sure, I think they're pretty much common sense and straightforward. I think it's pretty easy to say surface cleaning or a flattening treatment. Well, not surface cleaning, that can be sort of medium, and even in some cases major, depending on how it goes. But clearly there are things that take less time, things that don't alter the appearance or the structure of the photograph so very much. And I think those major treatments for me are something like daguerreotype cleaning, or completely rebuilding a package for a daguerreotype, or taking a photograph apart, taking it from a mount, completely breaking it down into almost its parts and putting it back together again, which is done and done successfully. That's major. And minor repairs and flattening are minor, and then there's some middle level, which is kind of defined in terms of the level of intervention with the object and the amount of time that it takes. So yeah, I don't think we need to agonize over that definition. I think that makes sense to most people.
Thank you. My next questions will address transformation of the conservation treatments. So to begin, I would like to ask you, and your observation of the work that's been done in the field over 30 years, what do you have perceived as major changes in the way treatments are approached or performed?
Okay, well, 30 years ago, I think people had less fear of what I would now call major interventions. And they had less fear to take on really intractable problems, such as changes in the silver fading. They were willing to try more readily quite radical approaches to dealing with problems that now would probably not be attempted at all, or if so, only under the most unusual circumstances. So I perceive, on the one hand, a kind of sober and improved, kind of a more learned caution for the major interventive treatments. I also perceive there are more photograph conservators than ever before. And even though conservators, understandably perhaps, haven't really found, and this is what speaks to your project here, I don't think they found necessarily the easiest or most comfortable ways to communicate with each other about treatment issues. And at meetings, quite naturally, people are more willing to share successful treatment approaches than they are unsuccessful ones. Nevertheless, due to the fact that there are more people in the profession, that the profession has advanced, that there's more experience and more forums or more opportunities for people to share experiences, I perceive that the overall level of what one would say more routine or bread and butter kind of treatments, or if there is such a thing, and I probably don't think there really is, that there is more of a self-confidence in the basics, and along with it, a greater reluctance to undertake the truly adventurous and experimental treatments with real objects, with significant objects. and more awareness that it isn't productive for anyone to have their secret recipes in the back room and their secret techniques and to hide from their colleagues or their clients what they're doing. So in other words, there is a maturity in the last 30 years, and those are the directions I think that it's gone in.
And do you think there's a, I will rephrase what you said, it was part of my questions, decreased level of intervention? Do you think there's in the field?
Probably that is the case, yes. It goes along with that idea of retreating from truly experimental, adventuresome, major interventions. I think that carries down to an overall reluctance, and there are some differences. There's differences among conservators. There's differences among conservation training cultures and traditions, national traditions. I think there's approaches that are peculiar to one country or one school of conservation sometimes even. Mm-hmm. And I'm not close enough to the subject to really go much further than that, except to say I'm aware of those. I know some, and certainly some conservators by reputation have a reputation that says I'm willing to do more, mm-hmm. and others I'm willing to do less, and both are successful. There's a client base and a happy customer base for both kinds. But if your question is, what's the general trend? The general trend is toward less intervention.
Thank you. And I'd like to ask you, in terms of perception of condition of a photograph, do you think that that how the perception of a photograph has changed in terms of its condition? How do we think, or the field or outside the field think of condition in terms of photographs? Do you think that has changed in these over 30 years?
I think if you look back at 30 years ago, when the pioneer photographic histories were appearing, and photography as a subject of interest in the fine art community was very much on the rise. You have major art museums devoting permanent galleries to photographs at that time, and you have art history books beginning to appear that talk about photographs not only as imagery and examples of aesthetic movements and the works of individual photographers, but you see more about process. You see more books reproducing the photographs in color rather than black and white, where if it's a black and white reproduction, you certainly lose any of the information that color can tell you about condition. Mm-hmm. And as people became more aware of process, they became more aware of what processes should look like and what they look like when they're deteriorated, and the effects of condition. And people began to pay more attention to the concept of a photograph patina, and that patina is deterioration with another name. But there's good deterioration and bad deterioration. Mm-hmm. There's the hallmarks of age and the hallmarks of the material nature of the process. Mm-hmm. That's the good stuff, that's patina. And then there's deterioration that undercuts the value, undercuts the appreciation. So clearly there's a continuum where there is less naivete about condition, more understanding of what condition means in the market, more understanding of what condition means in the appreciation of the photograph. I think that our profession, the conservation profession, has a long way to go in explaining this and explaining to people what to look for in this regard, and that consciousness is coming along, and it's better than 30 years ago, and in the last 10 years it's even way better than it was 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still got some long distance to go, and that's one of our jobs, is to educate everyone who's involved with photographs as to what the object is telling them. And condition is one of the most important messages that the object is telling them. Am I at my full aesthetic potential, or am I an object that has lost forever the bulk of my aesthetic potential? And what can you expect from me in the future if you buy me or treat me or do something with me? So I don't know. That's the condition issue. Is it certainly transcends treatment, but it's and that's where you start from. It's part of the aesthetics of it. If you want to do a treatment, one of your goals might be to make it be in better condition, whatever that means. And usually you have limited capabilities in treatment to do that, to improve the condition of objects as far as the fundamentals go, fading, surface change, things like that, silver mirroring, and so on. So, I don't know, I kind of lost the thread of your question, but did that answer it?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. So now I would like to ask you, as you mentioned, market.
Mm-hmm.
Do you consider that market influences treatment approaches or treatment?
Of course it does.
Decisions?
Of course it does. Sure.
Mm-hmm. Do you,
elaborate on that?
Elaborate. Why? How?
Well, I once heard the president of RIT, when he was holding a meeting, congratulating people who had gotten grants, bring all the people together and say, you've all brought money into this institution. Now, money isn't our goal, but it's one of the ways we keep score about how well you're all doing. And it's the same idea. Money isn't, we don't think of the value of photographs strictly as how much money they could bring in the market. Nevertheless, as the president said, their value in the market is one of the ways that that helps us to understand what their total value might be. It's one of the ways that you can keep score, or sort of, it's a guide. It isn't the end all and be all, but it's kind of, it's certainly a guide to what some people think. And we all know that the market is fickle, and the market changes, and that the market has its own driving forces. Nevertheless, whenever a photograph has a high value in the market, it does signal to people that this is an important object. It is one of those ways to keep score, and therefore allows people to, or it sort of pushes people, you might say, to engage with using resources to, if it's been, if it's high value in the market, it's probably for aesthetic reasons, perhaps for historical reasons, perhaps for sentimental reasons, but most often for aesthetic reasons. Someone has said, this is an important photograph, this is an important work of art. In that case, you look at it more closely. Well, exactly what are its aesthetic characteristics? What is its condition? What are the things that are wrong with it? And when it's high value in the market, presumably it can be held up as this is really worth looking at closely. And therefore, if it's got a little wrinkle, that wouldn't necessarily matter in another photograph whose interest was sentimental, then that wrinkle may not be worthy of treatment. But in the high value, the object that someone's, by definition, decided is important, and if that someone happens to be a curator, or that someone happens to be a collector, who's interacted with the market or understands the value in the market in some way and says, yeah, I want that wrinkle dealt with because it's slightly distracting. And in that case, it's logical, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
The market does, and the corollary to the market, which is kind of the collective judgment of the curatorial and art historical communities, that this is an important object, a valuable object, whether it goes on the market or not. Most photographs and collections seldom go on the market, and some never. So many never. Nevertheless, being aware that the market would value them highly naturally influences how much everyone involved is willing to engage with that individual object, and how far they're willing to go to to make sure that it's stable, to make sure that it's not threatened physically or chemically, or to make sure that it's aesthetically okay. And of course the market, when an object has high market value, it invites taking it right up to the limit of aesthetic and cosmetic improvements. And sometimes people go over those limits, yes.
And do you think that treatment changes or has the potential to change value in the market, or value?
Of course, for both good or higher value or lower value. Absolutely, it's always the same.
Mm-hmm.
This is part of the conservation profession. Look at an allied profession. Look at the antique furniture world, and you see famous examples of well and not so well-intentioned overzealous conservation, and underzealous conservation. So yeah, no, it's of course. Of course, it's the real world. Yeah.
So to continue, I would like to address these specific treatment topics that I have. And the first one is daguerreotype cleaning. And well, as you know, this was one of the first treatments performed to photographs since photographers and many other people after them. And I would like to know, and also has been a treatment that changed significantly in materials and methodologies through time. So I'd like to hear your opinion about
daguerreotype cleaning. Yeah. To me, it's the touchstone treatment issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's like all of your attitudes and understanding and your knowledge kind of come together in your opinion of daguerreotype cleaning. Because it's the perfect sort of the perfect blank sphere that reflects back exactly it's like the daguerreotype itself. It reflects exactly who you are and how much you know and what your values are. Because clearly the purest position would be that one cannot be totally sure of all that is going on in the chemistry of the daguerreotype plate surface, and that most daguerreotype cleaning involves chemical alterations and removal of something. It might be good, might be bad. Nobody can answer for sure. Nobody knows. And so the purest position is untenable. The purest position is tenable if you want to say never, no, never. And likewise, the opposite position on the other end of the spectrum of they could all be improved by dunking in my magic solution, and I know how to do it, and you don't, by the way. That's usually the hallmark of somebody who's telling you I know how the secret formula works, and you don't. That's very common. It's a good telltale of people's attitudes when they say I know or imply I know and you don't. But on the other end of the spectrum is people who would say, sure, they can all be improved by cleaning. And in fact, there have been periods in history when, in the 70s, all of the daguerreotypes in the island of Nantucket in Massachusetts, they have a historical society with wonderful daguerreotypes. And they had a very kind volunteer, a gentleman. I don't know his name, but I remember going there and seeing the daguerreotypes, and it was explained to me that the very kind volunteer gentleman had cleaned every single daguerreotype in the historical society. Took him a while to do it, but it was done. And it's that kind of story that makes you see that the non-purist extreme is pretty untenable. So the truth must lie somewhere the truth, or the conditional truth, the provisional truth, the truth that reflects you and your values, lies in the middle. And where do I stand? That was your question. Would I categorically say no, never? Well, no, actually I wouldn't. I would say that what I know is that there probably are some instances where people with a certain skill and experience and a certain level of understanding and discussion and context would appropriately clean a daguerreotype. Certainly not the majority of daguerreotypes, and certainly not without that level of individual thought, investigation, and discussion. And if I owned the daguerreotype and didn't know anything about it, I would be extraordinarily careful about anyone who advised me to clean, or advised me to let them clean, or any of that kind of thing. So I'm neither a purist nor I fall somewhat towards the purist side, but and I know that 25 years or 50 years from now, there will be completely different thinking, perhaps, or much more knowledge, or maybe not. It's also reality that 100 years ago, they probably thought we would know enough with all the advances to know all there was to know. We do not, and likely they never will. So it's the archetypal intervention that you must be prepared to understand, defend, discuss, and live with. You make your choice and you live with it, and therefore is a very interesting issue to talk about as the emblem of treatment. So,
thank you, Jim. So my next treatment topic is intensification, chemical intensification of prints, and this one of photographs of the negatives of prints. And this treatment as well is a historical treatment, and it has been used in different times and history of conservation, history of photography itself. So I would like to hear your opinion about this other treatment. When should it be performed? Not why?
Well, I think that I would be much closer to the purist never position with this question. From what I know about silver and how it behaves and what it looks like when it's in various states of deterioration, and also what it might look like after it's been treated chemically in this way, either to reduce mirroring or to increase density or both. In my understanding, it's rarely successful, and its long-term effects are very hard to predict. It is the last gasp when the patient is expiring on the table. It is to photoconservation what electroshock therapy might be to psychiatry. It's discredited and once was thought to be cool and full of promise, but is, might still be done, but it's probably done for different reasons than it used to be thought to help with, and therefore I don't think it has a place in the responsible practice with valuable photographs. I think it may have its place as a learning experience with photographs that have no particular value, and if only to show people the limitations of their art, but no.
And the middle photographs, let's say some photograph of personal value that somebody owns.
Well, you said it yourself, value. Personal value is value.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these days, it's easier than ever to digitally improve and reconstruct and generate a new image. It's when the original object has value that that you wouldn't consider intensification. And there's all kinds of value. Personal value is value.
My next topic is mounting and remounting photographs,
Mm-hmm.
and this treatment has also changed in the history of conservation treatments. It was done more often before. It was thought to be more necessary than it is perhaps now. So I would like to hear your opinion, your observation in this.
Yes. Yes. The old understanding of that might have been something like this. Here's a good photograph on a bad mount. One can see that this mount has been made from wood pulp containing materials. It's already, look how it's gray, look how it's brown. It's not good, it's not acid free. That's going to harm the photograph. And I might have thought that 30 years ago myself. And now I have a different, more sophisticated, I think, understanding. It goes something like this. Most photographic prints and many, many, many photographic negatives are surrounded by such materials. They may not necessarily be glued down to them, but they're all around them. That we know through research done here at IPI that lignin-containing materials can influence photographs through the vapor phase. It doesn't have to be in direct contact. And the point is that, just cutting to the chase, if you have the storage circumstances that would encourage interactions between those mounting materials and the photograph, its gelatin or albumin binder or its collodion binder and the silver image or the color dyes, if you have those environmental circumstances, they don't have, you're going to get harm anyway. You do more harm, potential harm, by the radical intervention of removal than you do of leaving it on there. And that's part of the original object in many cases. I mean, one can never be absolute. There are plenty of instances where, for example, if it's a very, very poor quality cardboard mount that has deteriorated, it's extremely brittle, it's preventing the photograph from being safely handled, it's a real threat. Yeah, but that's relatively rare. Why can't you use a tertiary support and to support it, and so on and so on. So the circumstances whereby the scenario adds up to, oh, this must come off the mount, actually these days are more often aesthetic than functional, and stabilization-wise. So aesthetically, okay, well, that's an aesthetic judgment. It's like any other. Do you want to paint half of it over again? You can do that, and that's defensible under certain circumstances. Likewise, removing it from his mouth for aesthetic reasons is defensible. But as a that simple equation of that's bad cardboard, it's harming the photograph, that's no longer current, and I don't think that's very appropriate.
My last topic in these specific treatment topics is modern and contemporary photography. And as I know, the tendency for bigger formats and the introduction of new materials, not only in the photographs themselves, but the mounting, like face mounting, and many others, has started to challenge the field when it gets to treatment. So I would like to know your observations of these materials. Do you think they can be treated?
The complexity has increased. We have centuries of experience with paper and cardboard. Centuries. We have hardly any experience with face-mounted acrylic giant things and with multi-layer RC print structures where the moisture relations in those, their mechanical behavior, their tendency to warp, and tendency not to lay flat, tendency to move around is very unfamiliar. And so when it comes to simple problems like how and to what do we mount a very large RC photographic print, I don't know, and neither does anyone else. The people who have the most experience are the people who are challenged to do that on a daily basis, the people in these labs, and they struggle, and the artists who make those things struggle with that. And when things go wrong, we are short of answers, I think. So I think that there's quite a bit of challenges both on the aesthetic and functional side of treatment for those objects, but I don't have the answers.
And in the case of a very severely damaged contemporary photograph, it has been suggested and done perhaps sometimes to reprint an object. So I would like to hear your opinion about this practice.
Oh, it really isn't a treatment question, is it? I mean, that's a pretty radical treatment. Remake it from scratch. Who reprints? How reprints? Is it? That becomes a question of aesthetic value. It's just another aesthetics question to me. Did the artist reprint it? How much involvement did the artist have? How much involvement does the artist have in making the prints in the first place? I don't know what the spirit of your question is getting at, but is it kind of like, is that going to put conservators out of business when they no longer have to do anything except order reprints, or what?
No, I think that in the practice of conservators, they have come to these instances when the severely damaged contemporary print cannot be treated. So
and they have recommended the last rites,
perhaps,
and creating a new one. Yeah.
So in that
yeah, I mean, I think that's fine. I don't know what to say. I think that's fine in the circumstances that are warranting in it.
Okay. Thank you. To continue with the interview, I would like to ask you some questions about training. And this, I would like to know if you consider that treatment proficiency is central to the competencies of a photograph conservator.
I think it's central to the competencies and sort of the professional identity of the photograph conservator as traditionally conceived. I mean, I think there are very successful people in the conservation profession who don't do treatment as part of their everyday work. They are in effect administrators or teachers or researchers or managers, and but I think I think in the training of such people, which is the spirit of your question, you don't need to bring every individual person who goes through training, conservation training, to the same level of proficiency and experience. I think that, at least it's been my experience,
Mm-hmm.
in the training that I've been involved in, is that people come to that training with different goals, with different experiences, and different levels of interest and proficiency in treatment. And some, I think, all need to have an acquaintance with it. All need to have some minimal level. They need to understand what treatment is all about. And they need to understand its limits, its goals, its peculiar discipline. And yet they do not need to be armed, all of them, with the same level of experience and depth and breadth of a technique that that the most interested, the most proficient, the most experienced will get. If you're going to be spending your career as a private conservator and doing treatment of fine art objects, like anything else, experience will be your most important attribute, and skill, of course. But and no training program can give that level. You can start people on the path of that. To say I'm a photograph conservator, I've never treated anything, and that's why I don't say I'm a photograph conservator, because I'm not. For this very reason, that element of my background was never there, and I didn't claim it was there. And I'm a treatment observer. So I do think, though, that you cannot not have some minimal level of experience and proficiency with that.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I also believe that being in the training business, so to speak, we have to look to the variety of roles that real-life conservators play, and maybe even stretch the definition of what a conservator is to fit a changing world.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's maybe another interview. What is the photo conservator today? But or what will it be tomorrow? But anyway, that's what I think.
Thank you, Jim. So to end, I would like to ask you a question about the future, and
Okay.
it's in terms of treatment. What do you think are the major challenges that the field of photograph conservation faces?
Well, I think I've touched on some of them earlier, and one of them is communication, inter-conservator and inter-institutional and all of that. I know Mrs. Rudenstein, for example, has been very interested in the last few years in the fact that the knowledge that Grant Romer is familiar, is always saying treatment is one of the very best ways to learn about photographs. And he's absolutely right. And all the learning and experience that's done in treatment in institutions tends to stay within it. And I was talking about how conservators are more apt to share what was successful and so on. But in truth, there's even a bias against treatment talks among conservators when they gather. I mean, maybe it's because people have expected them to be somewhat less than candid or something. I don't know, but or they're afraid that they're not of general interest, and I think it's because people don't put so much thought or come at it from the angle of the treatment as a learning experience. They come at it from the angle of well, this is what I did, and here's why I did it, and you can't criticize me for doing it because I did it for this reason, and you know, and it was successful by whatever way it's judged. It's a difficult subject to talk about, and it's that other level where, you know, like I was saying, Mrs. Rudenstein is interested in the fact of making museum documentation and treatment records more accessible. And I'm also saying that I hope in the future that conservators will talk about treatment in different ways and realize that there's a lot to know and say about it beyond just this is what I did, this is why I did it, and look how successful it is. And I don't mean just saying I did this and it was a disaster, but really to say, you know, to talk more on the meta level, the kinds of things that we have been doing a lot of in our institution are these sorts of things, and these are some of the broader issues that have come up in that, and you know, I learned this or that, or we all learned this or that. I don't know. Talk about it in a more, in a way that is gets away from the limitations the way it's been discussed in the past. I think that's what one of the things the future holds. I am not I think it will continue, the techniques will continue to evolve. I am not so optimistic that miracle treatments will come along to address huge things that we never thought were possible. I don't see that as the past evolution of it, and I don't see that as the future. I see, I did say I see progress, but I think that progress is incremental. And so, you know, and I see that more and more the trend I see is also that fewer and fewer objects are treated than ever before. Even so, there are more conservators. As we raise the bar in terms of documentation and professionalism, it just means quite simply that it takes longer to treat each object, and you know, no one in the real world treats things quite the way they did in training, where every last avenue was pursued, every last thing documented. That usually isn't the way it goes down in the real world. And but even so, I think the numbers of objects that are treated in the pool of experience is not going to be sufficient to produce huge innovations, huge leaps. But innovations and leaps will come, but incrementally. Okay?
Yes, thank you, Jim. I deeply appreciate your time and your interest to perform this interview.
Thank you, Alejandra.